How's it going, everyone? Nate Rossi, got Hunter Doyle with me here with Philly Insider Podcast, and we have some sombering news. A lot of you know that earlier today, Rhys Hoskins, trying to field a ball at first base during the Phillies spring training game, went down with what looked like a very, very serious injury. He went down holding his knee, and the fear was that he had a torn ACL. John Clark, just a few minutes ago, confirmed that after an MRI, he in fact does have a torn ACL, and he will miss the entirety of the 2023 Major League Baseball season. And that is a huge loss for the Phillies. We're going to get into the effect that might have, the options that the Phillies now have to replace Rhys. But either way, just because of Rhys's production, especially offensively, he is a big piece that the Phillies are going to miss this year, and he is confirmed out for the year. If you are just joining us, Rhys Hoskins is confirmed out for the year with a torn ACL. Hunter, how you feeling about this one?
Yeah, I think you said it before the stream, man. It's a real bummer. I think that's really the only way to describe it. It sucks. And let's get to this comment real quick. It literally just popped up. Let's not single out a minority of the Philadelphia fan base that is very dumb when it comes to making fun of injuries. This is not karma at all. Those people are not Philadelphia fans. They're not representative of Philadelphia fans. So I just wanted to address that first. I think that's kind of ridiculous. But I mean, it's just as bad to say it's karma for that too. But anyway, it does suck, man. It really does. And I still think we'll get into the team side of it a little bit more. I still think the team is in a good position going into this year. And I think that they're going to have some guys step up, but you had a guy like Rhys Hoskins going into a contract year and you just feel for him, man. You really do. I think he had a lot he wanted to prove, and whether he was going to get paid here or somewhere else, he was due for a pretty nice contract. Regardless, I know people have their opinions of him. He has his flaws in his game, and we've criticized him on here a number of times, but you never want to see a guy go down with an injury like this, especially in a contract year, and especially a guy who's been one of the longest tenured Phillies of this era, who kind of was one of the people who laid the groundwork for us moving forward into this era of contention now, where we're looking at being a World Series contender for years to come, hopefully. And yeah, it's a big blow. I mean, you're not going to replace his production single-handedly, right? You're going to have a collective effort of guys, which is what happened last year when Bryce went down. It's very possible, but at the same time, people can say what they want about Rhys and the flaws in his game. I mean, he's a big bat to lose, and you have a guy who hits 30 home runs a year. I mean, you just don't find those guys just sitting on the street in free agency, right? I mean, those are guys that don't just come around every single season. I think there's a lot of people who just think, all right, let's go get another first baseman to replace him because he can't play defense. It's just not that easy to replace that production. And I think we talked about that a lot this offseason, even with a guy like Derek Hall. And we'll talk about him a little bit later in this live. But I think it's easy to kind of get caught up in some of the mistakes and say it's easy to replace him. But I mean, I hope this injury kind of opens people's eyes to the fact that it's just not easy to replace him. And I'm not saying I'm going to wish the team to do worse, but I just hope this whole situation does, shed some light on, Rhys is a great player and doesn't really get enough credit for it because some of his flaws do come, his mistakes do come in some big moments, but we're not really here to talk about that right now. And I wish the best for him and his family and his recovery, praying for the surgery as well. And I really hope, just to finish off my kind of opening spiel, that last year wasn't the last, or today wasn't the last time we saw him in a Phillies uniform, because that would definitely rip my heart out. I mean, I've been a Rhys fan for a long time, and I think we all have loved him. He's endeared himself to the city for sure. He's really embraced it. And even when times have gotten tough, I mean, I think he's been a guy who's kind of navigated through it just by his play, right? He's not been a guy who's really been a distraction off the field when he's had some lack of success on the field. And I think that says a lot about who he is and just kind of how representative his play is of the city sometimes, the ups and downs that come with a season. But man, did he have his biggest moment in the biggest moment of all time for Phillies baseball. So, I really do appreciate him, and I'm really bummed out that this happened at this point so early in the season too.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and there has always been a pretty good conglomerate of Phillies fans who do not appreciate Rhys Hoskins, right? And a lot of that is because of what you said, making some defensive mistakes in big moments. He's been a guy who's had a lot of ups and downs over the course of a season, right? Any given season that he's been a part of the Phillies. And he'll be streaky from time to time. That's the truth. At the same time, if you look at the numbers, they will not lie to you. Rhys Hoskins is not a very replaceable guy, especially from an offensive standpoint. If you look at his numbers since coming into the league in 2017, he's top 15 in both home runs and RBIs. He's been a consistent producer over the course of his career, right? Again, we know that he has at times gone through struggles where he goes through these dry spells where he doesn't get a lot of hits, not a lot of home runs. But at the same time, he'll go on these streaks where he is hitting the ball out of the ballpark like crazy. And the really unfortunate thing is that he was having a very, very good spring training. The ball was flying off of his bat. He was going yard a lot. I had the opportunity to go down and see the Phillies in spring training and could attest for the fact that he was playing very, very, very well. And so for this to happen now is really a shame. And Hunter, you said it. This could be the last game we ever see of Rhys Hoskins in a Phillies uniform. And that's really, really unfortunate. If we look back at even just what he's done over the last year, he produced some big moments for the Phillies. I was also fortunate enough to go to a game where the Phillies played their first playoff game at home in over a decade, in 11 years. And in that game, Rhys Hoskins, against our arch rival, the Atlanta Braves, hit a 3-run home run that blew the game wide open. And in that moment, Phillies fans everywhere knew that we had something special last year. They knew that this team was special, and it was Rhys Hoskins who provided that moment. Even past that moment, I don't know if the Phillies make the World Series last year without Rhys Hoskins. If you take away what he did, past that moment, he came up in big, big situations. If you look at his numbers over the course of the postseason, you would actually be surprised that they were as low as they are from the standpoint of, batting average. Really wasn't that great. But he had a lot of home runs and a lot of RBIs over the course of that postseason last year. And he had them in very, very big moments. And guys who are able to do that are far and few between in this league. Hunter, do you think this is going to be his last game in a Phillies uniform?
Well, I think the more I think about it, I think there's a chance he comes back just because as a result of the injury, you just don't know what his market's going to be coming off of that. So there's always a chance the Phillies could bring him back. And I think he is a guy I think it's different for every player, right? I think a lot of people criticize players for taking a bag or, all this and that. End of the day, I think every individual player has to do what's best for them. So if Rhys does get a bag and he goes up somewhere else and takes it, I have no bad blood with him at all. I think it's the dumbest thing that people get mad at that sometimes. Not everyone is James Bradberry where they're going to take a hometown discount. And we're very glad we have James Bradberry, right? But that's not the reality. But at the same time, look, I think that Rhys is a guy who loves the city. I think his family loves the city. You have his wife buying beers for Phillies fans at the World Series games. And they've been a big part of the community as well. So I could definitely see him coming back next year. And I actually think it's a good possibility he comes back. But it sucks that it has to happen on these terms. I would never wish that upon him at all. And I think just talking about what you talked about real quick with, him having the biggest moments, it takes me back to when he first was called up with the Phillies and he goes on that streak where he hit 15, 16 home runs and X amount of days. That was just crazy, man. That was one of the best moments we had during those years. We didn't have much to cheer about and he gave us something to cheer about. So very thankful for the time he has spent in a Phillies uniform. Hope it's not the last. Cause again, I think people think it's just easy to replace a guy like that. And it's not only just his production. It's the fact that, who else? People say there's better options out there, but who are those better options? Now that there's an injury history, it seems like people don't really know who those better options are, who are, supposedly out there just sitting in free agency or supposedly out there on the trade market. There might be guys that come up at the deadline that are available, or there might be some guys that get cut that might be decent additions, but the guys who get cut are going to be depth pieces at most and guys who rotate around, right? We're not going to find a first baseman who gets cut. It's just going to replace Rhys Hoskins' production. So I think there's a good chance he comes back. I think the Phillies organization and him have a very good relationship. And but at the same time, they still have to extend Nola too, and they haven't done that yet. That worries me a little bit. I was really hoping they were going to get that done before the season. They still can, but there's been no news there. So I'm not excited about that. But if they don't re-sign Aaron Nola, then yeah, I think it becomes even more of a possibility. But I'd rather that not interfere with it either. So I think there's a good possibility he comes back in a Phillies uniform. And yeah, that's kind of what I got on that.
You do make a good point. This probably increases the chance that Rhys Hoskins is going to be back in Philadelphia. I don't know if it's 50% or more, just because there really aren't a lot of first basemen who are going to hit 30 home runs consistently for you every year. And again, that's reflected in the statistic. I said it earlier, I'll say it again, that he was top 15 in the league, in both RBIs and home runs since joining the league in 2017, being called up. Again, starting with that hot streak where we all fell in love with him. And I know that people are saying, Derek Hall is going to be able to replace him. Look, Derek Hall has had a very, very good spring training. He's been going yard. He's been hitting very well. That's for sure. His hitting has looked a lot better in spring training than it did last year, right? And Derek Hall had his moments. He sure did. But he also definitely had certain liabilities, even at the plate, even though we call him Long Ball Hall. And the truth is, even if the Phillies do, quote unquote, have good replacements, right? We've talked about the fact that now Sosa is probably going to get more playing time, and I don't know how that's going to work out, but just as a result of he's a really good infielder, he's going to get more time now. And these guys are good players, but at the same time, Rhys Hoskins is a step above that. He's a guy who is difficult to replace, and that is reflected in the numbers. There are not a lot of guys in this league who are going to consistently hit 30 home runs a year. And I know that we can get on him about his defense, but that production is really, really difficult to replace. And I'm getting a little bit concerned about the fact that we're missing Bryce up until probably sometime around the All-Star break. It's not certain when he's going to come back or not. He says he feels good. There's a chance that he comes back a little bit earlier than the Phillies had indicated. But the fact that they're missing that much offensive production, now missing both of these guys, I'm a little bit concerned. And it is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? But I am a little bit concerned given the division that we're in. Hunter, give me your outlook on the Phillies now that we're in this situation where we don't have Rhys this year.
Well, first off, I think you'll agree with the point I'm about to make right now. And let me preface by saying I'm not saying this person is going to replace them position-wise, but in terms of production in the lineup, the pressure on Nick Castellanos is massive now. I mean, this guy really, really has to produce. I know he hasn't had a good spring training. I'm trying not to hit the panic button yet because, again, you just don't really know how to judge spring training sometimes, but he's going to really have to step up next year. I think we were all hoping he was going to have that bounce back season. Now it's kind of it's pretty much almost a priority at this point that he has that bounce back season. I mean, if he doesn't, we're definitely going to be in a tough spot these first few months, Rossi. I'm very concerned about that. As far as the outlook on, playing first base, I think Derek Hall is definitely going to take a lot of the reps versus righties. But again, the whole point of him taking reps versus righties was while Bryce is out, you'll have Hall to help in that DH spot to help replace some production that you're going to lose, right? And now you're losing, like you said, both Bryce and Rhys. You weren't expecting Hall to have to replace both those guys' production. And obviously you're not going to expect them to do that single-handedly. But I think you're going to have him probably play first base and hit against righties. We're going to see how Hall does defensively there. He hasn't played first base very much in his professional career, both minors and majors, for a reason. But again, I mean, he's going to have to do it at some points. And then I think versus lefties, you're probably going to see. I hate that Bohm has to move over to first base because I think he's gotten so comfortable at third, and I think he's played so well there over the past year, especially like this spring. I think he's had some good moments there, and yeah, I feel like he like last year at the end of the year, I was like, all right, he's probably like an average third baseman, but I feel like honestly, if I'm looking back on it and thinking about it going into the season, he might be like slightly above average now the way he's progressed at third base, and I think his power has increased. Yeah. Bohm, I think there's a good probability he's going to play first base against lefties, and then you're probably going to play Sosa at third. And like you said, like they're great players. I think Sosa is honestly a starter on a number of MLB teams, the way he's playing right now. If the Phillies continue to develop him the way he's been going, I mean, he's going to be a really valuable trade piece at some point. I'd love for him to stay at Philly for as long as possible, but I mean, I'm sure he'd love to get playing time, and I'm sure there's other teams who'd love to give him playing time down the road. So But again, like you said, it's going to be tough to replace Rhys. And I think those guys, Sosa, Bohm, Hall, I think they can help replace some of that production. And obviously, Bohm was already going to be in the lineup regardless. But and Turner, I think, will help replace some of that production too. And you have all those other guys in the middle of the order. But a lot of it to me is really going to come down to how Castellanos performs this year. And I really think he's got to have a bounce back season for us to have a lot of success early on, or else it's going to be kind of up and down, I think, to start this season. That's my projection. And also, I think that I wouldn't rule out if there are issues early in the season, I wouldn't rule out them making a trade earlier than the deadline. Not that they'll hit the panic button, but I think they'll have a sense of urgency. I think that's the better way to put it. Going into kind of that like May, June stretch possibly. But we'll see as the season progresses, and we'll see who becomes available as the season progresses. There's always guys in rebuilding teams. I know someone DM'd me, maybe a guy like Joey Menezes, who just played for Team Mexico, had some big hits for them. He plays for the Nationals. Actually, a former Phil. I think he only had 4 at-bats with the Phils in the majors. But, I mean, he's a guy who had a really good year last year. But I think it's kind of similar to Derek Hall, though. I mean, a guy who just made his major league debut at 26-ish. I think Menezes might be a little bit older. So at that point, I'd probably rather just let Derek Hall play. I want to give Derek Hall a shot to start the season. And I think my only concerns with him are hitting the breaking ball. Can he do that consistently? And can he lay off of it consistently as well? I need him to be a little bit better with that. And I need him to be able to hit against lefties sometimes, not all the time, but he needs to be able to do it a little bit because, again, like you said, this is a sprint, not a marathon, which is even more reason he needs to be a little more consistent over the full season. I think he got hot for a couple weeks there, and that was awesome. But those last, I want to say 2-ish weeks he was on the major league roster, I think he hit around 230, if I'm not mistaken. He still had a few extra base hits here and there, but yeah, he's definitely got a big task ahead of him, and I'm not ruling out that he can do it, but I think it's a lot of pressure to put on a guy who hasn't played a ton in his major league career. So I'm hoping Hall can be a big producer, and I think the potential's there for sure. But we just don't know, again, going into the season. And you kind of you knew what Rhys was, right? He was a known commodity. So that's what I got on kind of the outlook. How about you?
Yeah, if we can pull up that last comment, the one glimmer of hope to me is that Derek Hall and Sosa have looked very, very good in spring training. Probably, other than Rhys, probably the 2 brightest points. Trey doesn't count in my mind because he's playing for the World Baseball Classic, and we all knew what Trey was going to be, right? In my mind, maybe the most 2 surprising points are Sosa and Derek Hall, the 2 guys who are going to get, in my mind, the most increase in production as a result of this. I kind of agree with this comment. Look, Derek Hall is a decent player, right? He's a good piece to have, and especially now he's an important piece to have given this injury. But Philadelphia fans, I think, have had Hoskins is just one of those players. We've had a bias against him, and I will admit there have been times when I've had that bias against him, out of emotional frustration after some of those errors that Rhys made at first last year. I was saying, I'm done. I don't want him on the team anymore. He's got to be gone. But from a logical standpoint, Rhys has been important to this team. He's been one of the few pieces that was a part of this team when we were just in the dumpster as a franchise, right? He's one of the few guys who has stayed with this team for that long and saw us through that, and then has been able to be a big producer now that we're a contender. And so I think there is a little bit of a bias against Rhys Hoskins, and I think that's part of the reason that people are buying into the Derek Hall hype. Now, the reason I'll say that I'm starting to buy into it is because of, again, the spring training that he's had. He's looked very good. We'll see if that translates into the regular season because, Derek Hall started off when he came up last year really, really well and then cooled off a little bit. And like you said, some of those liabilities against lefty pitchers and against the breaking ball at the plate, that showed up as the year went on. And that happens for a guy who just comes up. And we'll see if he can continue to grow. Sosa, I'm really encouraged about just to see that the leaps that he's taken, to your point. And now I'll touch on Castellanos. a lot of people are saying don't hit the panic button yet on Castellanos because it's spring training. That's always not indicative. Actually, a lot of times it's not indicative at all of how a guy is going to do, especially a hitter, over the course of the year. But this is why I'm concerned about Castellanos. To me, he looks like exactly the same guy at the plate during spring training as he was over the whole course of last year. And now for me, you're talking about a year plus of a guy who was at one point for a half a year about MVP caliber, far, far below average. And it's both at the plate and in the field. Castellanos is statistically a terrible fielder. So not only does he really not have upside in the field, he's had no power. He's been a strikeout machine, and he has continued the same bad habits over the course of spring training, right? No plate discipline, not able to pick up sliders and breaking balls out of the pitcher's hand at the plate. And if you can't do that as a hitter, there is no chance you can be elite, and probably you're going to be below average in Major League Baseball. And so to see some of those trends continue for Nick Castellanos, I am very, very concerned. Because if he's not a guy who's going to produce for them now in the absence of Rhys Hoskins, then we very well might be in trouble.
Yeah, I just really am confused by the whole Castellanos situation because I was a huge fan of him when he was in Detroit and before he got to Cincinnati. And then when he was in Cincinnati and Chicago, I loved him there. And the reason I loved him there is because he had power to all parts of the field, and he could take those breaking balls when they were in the zone, when he could lay off of them, but he could also take them when they were in the zone to right center field. And I love that he had that opposite field power because that's something that, I mean, every hitter should learn how to do. I guess Joey Gallo never learned how to do that since he's a straight pull hitter and three outcome player who just hits home runs, strikeouts, and walks. But
yeah, that's true.
You know, he's made a career out of it though, so credit to him. But anyway, that's one of the reasons I love Castellanos because I thought he was such a technically sound hitter and such a fundamental hitter. And then he comes to Philadelphia, and I just haven't seen that at all. And I know he can do it, and I know he has that in him, and I know he has that potential. And he should be in his prime years right now. And maybe he does bounce back this year, and maybe the preseason or the spring training reps aren't indicative of that. But I'm really hoping he can get back to form because we really need him to right now. And I love this comment, but I hate that I love it because it's so true. And
yeah,
this is something I hate about our fan base sometimes. None of the people in here, love all you guys, but something I hate about the fan base sometimes is that you have people go to such extremes on being so biased against the player that then the people who are on the other logical side of that, then they have to go to the extremes to defend their own view. And then it seems like they don't like Derek Hall, right? Which in reality, I love Derek Hall. I would love for him to go out there and have a tremendous season. He was so much fun last summer. I mean, he had a great, 3-4 weeks he was hot. I mean, those were some of the most fun weeks of the season.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Outside of the playoffs. But, then it makes people feel like they almost have to cheer against Derek Hall because people hate on Rhys Hoskins so much. And that's a shame. It's a shame that that's a part of the fan base that exists. I personally have not fallen into the hate Derek Hall category. I still love him. I'm still going to root for him. And I hope he goes out there and has an amazing season. When I criticize him, it's because I have certain concerns about his game, but I'm also going to talk about the positives of his game that I can see him building upon, which is what I kind of mentioned when I was talking about him earlier. But it really is a shame that that's a part of the fan base too. And that's kind of what I got to say on that. But I want to get to this comment too. Benjamin, welcome in. Thank you for watching the stream. This is something we talked about in the chat earlier. Now, he hasn't played first base, Sosa that is, at all in his major league or minor league career. I checked that earlier today. But I think if anyone could learn it, it's him. He's learned how to play center field right now. He's athletic. I mean, he could absolutely do it. I think it probably make more sense to move Bohm over to first and play Sosa at third, though. I mean, I think your defense is going to be a little bit better that way, right? Specifically versus lefties in that scenario, right? I mean, I probably wouldn't be playing as much as I love Sosa. If Derek Hall is going to be able to be somewhat consistent this year, I'm not playing Sosa over him at first base because the power production is something that's going to help you a ton as the season moves along.
It's also notable that if you move Sosa to first base, you're losing one of his best qualities, which is in almost every other position on the field, infield, outfield. He is an incredible fielder, an elite fielder. Don't let that highlight or the low light of him, hitting the first base umpire in the head on that errant throw. Don't let that fool you because he's a very good fielder. And the truth is, if you move him over to first, you're losing a little bit of that. Also, the concern is that Alec Bohm is not going to be able to play first. Look, he actually does have experience playing first base in this spring training, right? And so I think the Phillies were kind of just trying to cover their bases, get him a little bit more experience at a different position. You always want to get guys who have that utility, but it was a little bit ugly when Alec Bohm played first. Again, that was one of the games I had an opportunity to go to as I was covering the Phillies down in Florida. Had a great time watching them. And, watching Alec Bohm play first, he made a couple of mistakes in the same inning. Not that Rhys doesn't do that, but, he failed to pick a ball that he should have. There was also one that was hit towards him that he should have fielded, that hit him in the chest, dropped it. So, look, it's probably going to be a learning curve and a steep one at that, no matter how you cut it, whether it's Sosa, who, to your point, has never played first base in the majors or minors, but is a little bit more athletic guy, a better fielder all around. And then you have Alec Bohm, who does have a little bit of experience, but is a little bit less athletic, has more of the build for first base than Sosa does, to be fair. But again, to your point, you brought this up. Alec Bohm was not only getting comfortable at third base, over the course of the playoffs, he was an above average fielder at third base. And I'll tell you what, there was nobody who was more angry at Alec Bohm than me when he made those multiple errors in the same game early on in the season, in the same inning, and then said, I effing hate this place. There was nobody who was as angry as me. I was like, send him down, get rid of him. I can't deal with this anymore. I can't deal with the terrible fielding at the corners. And you know what? The way that he responded definitely won me back a little bit, because he just directly dealt with it, right? He apologized and he said, it's not true. I just said that out of frustration and out of emotion. And as a Philadelphia fan, I can understand that. Trust me, there's a lot of things that I say out of emotion about our Philly sports that I later regret and aren't exactly logical. But you know what? He won me back for sure. And then the way he played over the course of the year, where he picked himself up, blue collar type of season, and then towards the end of the year was an above average fielder. That was awesome. Yeah. And if you move him to first base, you're losing that, because you're going through it all over again, where he has to adjust to a new position. Mm-hmm. So either way, you either take, when there's a lefty pitcher in the lineup and Derek Hall's not going to be over there at first, most likely on most occasions, you're either taking Sosa or Bohm and putting him at first, as far as what we have now, options we have now on the roster. And either way, you're missing something in the field when you're doing that. So it's just not a good situation all around to be losing Rhys.
Yeah, and they will move Sosa to third base. Just to clarify, we're not saying they're going to move him there over Alec Bohm. He's going to play there when lefties are hitting, most likely. And just throughout the year, I mean, there's going to be times where Bohm needs a day off or Bohm's DHing. They are going to move Sosa to third base in those scenarios. They moved him there last year, so I don't think that's much of a radical thought. And then as far as this comment goes, I'll tackle this one real quick. I've seen a lot of people mention Schwarber, Castellanos. Could you potentially train one of them at first base down the road? Schwarber played first base for Boston a couple years ago, and looked terrible. I don't think that's a great idea. Castellanos started his career as a third baseman, and there's a reason he's not playing third base anymore. I think that it's probably a good idea to keep both these guys as corner outfielders or DHs especially to start the season. So, yeah, I mean, and gotcha, Ethan. Appreciate you clarifying that. But yeah, so I think both these guys are sticking in the outfield. If one of them could play first base, I think it's a no-brainer. Absolutely. But unfortunately, both of them aren't even good in the corner outfield spots. But those are the spots where they're the least bad, I think it's fair to say. Yeah. And, hopefully this, having a couple of these guys out of the lineup, it might give us a chance to DH them a good bit at the start of the season, which is kind of nice. But, yeah, do you want to get a few more of these comments here?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Let me find, there was one I saw earlier that I wanted to get to. So having mediocre preseason games often translates into a great regular season. Yes, this kind of goes to the point we were talking about of, spring training. Sometimes it can be the complete opposite of what, the regular season is the complete opposite. And obviously you hope that happens with Castellanos. But then on the flip side of that, you almost worry about certain guys like for me, a guy who I think of right away is this is kind of unrelated, but Jake Cave. Jake Cave's had a tremendous spring training, and I love what he's doing so
Yeah.
far. But end of the day, I mean, there's not always major league pitchers out there. Sometimes you're facing AAA talent, and that's a huge difference. And obviously, you get in the regular season. I mean, you're going to see those guys some of the time, but most of the time you're getting the best of the best. You're not just getting AAA talent out there, and it's a season with many ups and downs. I mean, the guy I think of right away when I think of Philly spring training stand out for two of them, Cedric Hunter and Brock Stassi, two guys who had great spring trainings. And I remember Brock Stassi, I think he was older, finally made the Phillies roster after years and years and years of trying to get on. And I mean, great story for him and great story for Cedric Hunter making that roster. Cedric Hunter got cut like later in May. And then I think Brock Stassi got cut like not long after that. So it's unfortunate. You just never know what's going to translate and what's not going to translate from spring training. Sometimes guys don't play well in spring training and they don't play well in the regular season. So it's really hard to judge right now how much of Rhys's production we can replace.
Yeah. And, for me, the concern for Castellanos, and this is what this comment was in regard to as we were talking about Castellanos and his potential to play well and kind of fill that void that Rhys is going to leave this year. The reason that I'm concerned, again, more than the fact that he's having a bad spring training, is now that he has played very poor baseball, especially at the plate, for over a year now, because we just didn't see it last year. And when we expected to, when there were moments where he had big hits, quite frankly, pretty much all of his hits, Castellanos, in the postseason came in big moments. Mm-hmm. He had some big moments where he came through with hits. I can think of, that comeback in game 2 of the World Series when we came back against the Astros and won that game. Or was that game 1?
Game one.
That was game 1. So he had a big hit to help the Phillies win that game. I believe he also had a big hit, or at least got on base in a big moment against the Cardinals in that game where they came back. So he did have some big moments, but right when you thought that maybe that was going to propel him to, going on a streak where he's hitting the ball over the fence, or again, hitting with power opposite way, spraying it all over the field like he did when he was an MVP candidate, just when you thought that was going to happen, it didn't. And it never happened for him last year. And now you're talking about a really long time since that guy has looked good at the plate. And that, to me, is the concern. The continuation of the trends that are concerning for Castellanos, not just the fact that he's having a bad spring training alone in a vacuum, because in a vacuum, that really means nothing. But it's the continuation of those trends that really concern me about Castellanos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to your point about him in the postseason, there was the one I always remember is the one he had in game 1 versus the Braves on the road, because I knew going into that series, I mean, that was one of those series where I felt like Sixers Celtics, that the Braves always have our number. There's no way we're going to be able to win this series. But if we win game 1, I think we actually could win this series. And Castellanos had a huge hit, I believe, in the first inning or so, after Ranger Suarez gets us out of a huge jam, or first or second inning. And I mean, it just couldn't have come in a bigger moment. And then you talk about the plays he had in the field in the playoffs. I mean, tremendous. Some of those plays saved the season for sure. So, you're hoping you get a little bit more of that. But yeah, you just don't really know how much to trust him going into the season. It's really just kind of a matter of hope at this point. I mean, we're not on the inside looking at what they're working on with him. And maybe some of those results where he's having struggles at the plate is more of just him, them working on certain issues with him at the plate where he's trying to just work stuff out and practice new things or new techniques or something like that. I don't know, but it is concerning. And then here, another comment on Castellanos here. Michael Campbell, welcome in. I think Castellanos bounces back this year, and Hall can hold down the fort at first. But the guys on this team really like Hoskins, and he's the NLCS MVP if Harper doesn't hit the bomb. And that's a great point. Even with these guys, let's say these guys are able to kind of hold down the fort and, replace that production, which that alone will be huge. But I think it's also kind of underestimated the leaders you're losing on this team, and Bryce Harper. And Bryce Harper's still going to be around. I'm sure Rhys Hoskins is still going to be around the team too. But it's different when those guys aren't on the field with you. Just kind of going through that same like storyline, journey, experience. It really is kind of like a movie unfolding before your own eyes that you're a part of in an MLB season. And, especially with us having some of those young guys, and now Hall being a young guy, I mean, I know he's not a young guy, but he's not an experienced major leaguer. So, in terms of like mentality, he's still kind of getting used to like what it takes to be at the big league level mentally. That's not a knock on him. It's just the reality of not being in the league very long. You're losing some leaders there. And I think, you need guys like JT to just be huge for this team, who he has been for a while. And as a catcher, he has to be a leader alone, just off of that. And Schwarber was a huge leader for us last year. Him to continue to kind of carry that load there. And just some of these young guys, I want to see one of these young guys kind of take on a leadership role too. Maybe it's Bohm, and just kind of lead by example too. I think it's important for those guys, at that age to be able to have that quality. I think is really it sets you apart a good bit. So I'm looking forward to seeing kind of who steps up alongside the guys that are already in leadership roles going into this year.
Yeah. And Michael, thanks. That's a really great comment. You make some really good points there. My hope is that this will happen, that Castellanos does bounce back and that Hall holds down the fort. And I think that the Phillies can absolutely still be contenders if that's the case, but you're going to need it to happen now. I think before you didn't need Castellanos to produce in order to be a contender. Now you're in a situation where you do, which is really unfortunate. Fingers crossed it does happen. He is a very, very talented player, but we have seen in professional sports, really talented players get essentially have their careers ruined by not being able to adjust mentally. Right. And I think a lot of this is mental, and a lot of the game of baseball is mental. It is why it is such a unique sport. It's why it's one of the best sports ever invented, because it is so mental. It is so technical. And right now, Castellanos, despite all the talent, despite all the power that he has technically and mentally, he's not the same guy as he was earlier in his career. And let's hope that can change, right? Let's hope that can change. And if it does, then we're in good shape. Really, even without Rhys, we are still in very good shape. And one thing that I do want to recognize is the fact that down the stretch, especially late regular season for the Phillies, the reason that they made the playoffs, it really wasn't these big name guys, these big salary guys, right? It was the Phillies nursery. It was some of these young guys. It was Bryson Stott. It was Alec Bohm. It was Sosa, who's not as young, but he's one of those rotational guys. It was those guys who propelled them to a playoff berth. So the hope is that with the depth that the Phillies have, and they do have pretty solid depth, with that depth and some of those young guys, they'll be able to fill that void that Rhys has left now. They'll be able to fill that as a team. Not just one individual, right? Not just Castellanos going out and doing it by himself because he produces again, which would be great. That would be wonderful. But the hope is that this team can come together, they can rally together. And some of those depth pieces, some of those younger guys can really put things together for the Phillies and propel us to another deep playoff run.
Absolutely. And I want to get to this comment first real quick. I'll tackle this one just real quick. Who do you think will be the utility second baseman between Josh Harrison and Scott Kingery? It's going to be Josh Harrison. They signed him for, I think, around $2 million. So, I mean, that was an indication right away that he was going to be pretty much a lock for the bench spot. And he's had some good moments in spring, and I like him a lot. He's a good player. Versus Scott Kingery's not on the 40-man roster yet. Today, that actually might open up a spot for him because he's actually had a tremendous spring, and he's fixed his swing a lot. He worked with Kevin Long a lot during the offseason in Arizona, if I'm not mistaken, which that says a lot. And he looks like a different player, which is good. He had that battle with COVID. He's had injuries. I think now he's kind of at a spot where he kind of got like a little bit of a restart. So I think there's a chance Kingery makes the roster. Even if he doesn't, I think he's good AAA depth at this point. But to answer your question right there, it's going to be Josh Harrison. Him, Sosa, and Stubbs were pretty much the locks for the bench. And then the only other guys that were there was only really 1 to 2 spots open. I think they're probably going to keep 5 guys. I think Hall's pretty much a lock at this point. You can lock him in. Yeah. And then it kind of comes down to, unfortunately, Dalton Guthrie, I think, took himself out of the running. He had a really bad spring at the plate, which sucks because I thought he played so well in September last year, and I saw him play in Lehigh last year. I thought he was such a good player, and I think he's got such a crisp swing when it's working well. I think he can play all over the outfield, but it's really down to Cave and Kingery, and I'm interested to see which one of them gets the last spot. So we will see with that. And then if you have any thoughts on that, you can add to that, Rossi, but I'm going to get to this one real quick as well. Have you all talked about the pitching depth problem with Ranger getting a setback on his injury yet? Great question. We have not. I thought Noah Scarell looked good for Team Canada, but it seems we are pretty thin there. Yeah, this is another great question. So for one, Ranger had a setback. He's probably not going to start the season in the rotation, which that also really sucks. It seems like he's had some injury setbacks at a number of times in his career. So it's really unfortunate. And It sounds like they're probably going to go in with Matt Strahm as the 5th guy and then probably bullpen from there on out. And I think we have the depth to do more bullpen days at this point, at least to start the season, right? It's not going to happen as the season goes on. But to start the season, I wouldn't be opposed to that. And I think they're going to do a 6-man rotation at some point. But yeah, we are pretty thin there. I mean, you think about it, Taijuan Walker now has to be your number 3. And I think he can do that. But then that means, more importantly, Bailey Falter's your number 4. Which that's a big difference between, and I like Bailey Falter a lot, but it's a big difference between Taijuan Walker at 4 and Bailey Falter at 4. I mean, I think there's a pretty wide gap there, right? When you're talking about a 4 versus a 5 in Taijuan Walker versus Bailey Falter, it's like, all right, yeah, there's a big gap, but he's the 5th guy, right? Now there's a little more pressure on Falter. He's going to be in some situations where we might ask him to win us a series as a starter at some point. You know, you're going to have to go out there and put together a good outing that can win you a 3-game series and in that finale, or help us to get that second win to get us that series win. And it adds a little more pressure on. So we are a little bit thin there. And I am actually a little bit concerned about the pitching depth right now. Because I think, like you said, Skro was pretty good, Benjamin, but he's kind of one of those minor league guys. Like, he's a good minor league player. He has okay stuff. He'd probably like survive in the big leagues a little bit. Like, I think he's kind of like Plasmeyer. I like Plasmeyer too, but very dependent on location, not like super high velocity, and just not sure how they would do over a full course of an MLB season. And I think you're kind of hoping that, you know, especially now with Painter down, you're kind of hoping that one of these guys in McGarry or Abel, or both, work their way up here pretty quickly as the season moves along. You don't want to put pressure on them, and you're not going to bring them up before they're ready, right? But you do want to see one of those guys sooner rather than later be ready to go. Because, yeah, while they're young guys, you don't know how they're going to perform. As you said, we're thin. So, I mean, it's not really like a huge drop-off, even if they don't pitch well, in my opinion. So that's kind of my thoughts on those 2 questions. Sorry, I know I was talking for a little bit there, but...
No, you're 100% right. And, you know, on some of those rotational guys, whether they're going to make the team or not, Hoskins, Harrison, I think you were dead on. As far as the pitching staff goes, short term to begin the season, it is a little bit of a problem. You've got Andy Painter, who's not going to start the season. It was questionable whether he was or wasn't to begin with. He was always at this point, you know, especially after what Middleton and Dombrowski have said, he's gonna be called up at some point this year. Obviously, the setback was that injury now, that tendonitis that he's got in his elbow. Same thing with Ranger. And the problem with tendonitis is it is a very fickle animal. And I've had the same exact injury. Actually, I'm recovering from it right now. Like, I had like 2.5 weeks out of the gym and I'm back in. The difference between me, you know, some average Joe who's going to the gym and just have to take, you know, 2.5 weeks off, is I'm not having to do inhuman things with my arm. Like, these guys, the stress that their arm, their shoulder, their elbow is under, it is actually inhuman. Like, it's just scientifically, a human arm is not supposed to be able to do that or go through that kind of strain. So, you know, stuff like tendonitis is going to happen. And the problem with that is that can be something that's long-term and recurring, like we've seen with Zach Eflin and his knees, right? Honestly, something that sidetracked his whole career. Or it could be something where, you know, Ranger and Andy Painter, they need a month of rest and they're fine, right? They need 2 months of rest and they're fine. And so that's the hope. That's my expectation, because you know, that's generally what happens with tendonitis. But there is the concern early on when those guys definitely won't be there in the rotation, where you're right. That's a big drop off. It is big that they got Taijuan Walker, to at least to be fair, because you're in a really precarious situation if you didn't go and get that extra depth in your rotation. You're talking about Bailey Falter starting the year as your number 3, which is really a problem.
Yeah.
But, you know, the rotation I'm not as concerned about, because if you look at long-term, you're looking at Nola, Wheeler, Ranger, which is an incredible 3. And then you're talking about Taijuan Walker and Andrew Painter, which is just, that's star-studded rotation. And then you can throw Bailey Falter in there as your 6th starter in that rotation to give those guys some more rest, because what we saw in the World Series was that our Achilles heel was Wheeler and Nola ran out of gas. And that was unfortunate. It was really encouraging to see Nola not run out of gas like he usually does in September last year. I think that the approach they took with him last year was the big difference. That's why he had the year that he had, where he didn't, you know, run out of gas late in the season. It's because they managed him differently. It's because they were very intentional in trying to, you know, get him those extra rest days and throw those bullpen days in there. And that's not going to change. They're going to do what they have to get these guys extra rest, Nola and Wheeler, to make sure that they're fresh for the whole season. And so you're going to see guys like Bailey Falter called upon a little bit more than you would like early this season, to your point, Hunter.
Just answer this question real quick too. Jose, thank you for tuning in. Is it the same knee that he had previously injured or no? So no, it is not. He had that right knee or like meniscus surgery in the offseason this past year. That was a different injury. And this one is left knee, I believe, right? I think this one was left ACL, if I'm not mistaken.
It was left, yes.
Yeah, so it's a different one. So wouldn't mind adding a right-handed bat at this point, but I doubt they'd do it. Yeah, I think it's going to be tough to find a guy, especially now free agency is pretty much wrapped up. I think Jurickson Profar was really like the last guy on the market. And if I had known that Rhys was going to get hurt, I probably would have maybe looked into Jurickson Profar a little bit more, just because he plays just about everywhere and you can move guys around. You'd have a little more versatility, but I wasn't anticipating Rhys getting hurt. So there's probably a few other guys on the free agency market. I mean, I wouldn't go that route. I don't think you need to. I think a trade, you definitely need to explore your options if Derek Hall does not perform well. But the only way you kind of find out what Derek Hall can do over, the course of a long stretch is by letting him play that out a little bit. And I think that's honestly the best way to go at this point, right? I mean, I think there's other options you could try. And look, if someone becomes available via trade, or like you make a call and someone you didn't expect to be available is available and you're able to get them at a good price, then yeah, you're probably going to bring him in. But I just don't know who's out there that's really going to have that impact right now when teams pretty much have their rosters finalized for opening day. And, I'm probably going to do a little digging the next couple of days, look into, which rebuilding teams that pretty much have no hope for the season might be willing to ship a guy off. But again, it's day one. I mean, even teams who are looking to rebuild, they're going to let it play out at first. I mean, the players, while they might understand they're on a rebuilding team, they're all out there playing baseball, having fun. And the goal every time you step foot on the field on opening day is to go win a championship, whether you think you got a shot or not. I mean, that's what players believe in from the first game up until 162 or until elimination. So I think it's just kind of a weird point in spring training. It's not really where you're going to find like a Sam Bradford available. And I wouldn't want to give up a first round pick for Sam Bradford, but thankful the Vikings did. But anyway, yeah, I think you probably around June-ish, July, if Hall is starting to cool off or he's not playing very well, I think that's probably around when you do it. Or, I mean, if he just starts the season horrendously, you might think about May, but I'm hopeful he'll at least start the season well.
Yeah, and we're going to hope that the spring training he's had just continues to show up in the regular season. Again, though, those are AAA pitchers, sometimes worse, that he's playing against. So we'll see what happens. I do agree with you, though. Right now, their best bet is Derek Hall. You got to let it play out a little bit and see what he has to offer. There were times last year that Derek Hall looked pretty good, where he gives you some of that power that you're going to be missing now with Rhys gone. So, anybody who's sitting here and as we're praising Rhys and talking about the fact that he's been a big piece would walk away from the stream saying that, they're saying Derek Hall isn't any good. No, that's not the truth at all. I think we're both sitting here agreeing that Derek Hall is the way to go right now, especially against, righties. He's the way to go. He's what you got. And there are worse options out there. So right now we'll see what happens with Derek Hall, and fingers crossed that he can make up for some of what we're losing with Rhys being gone.
Absolutely. And yeah, I saw, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, Troy, and to your point, I mean, we could probably see a Nick Nelson piggyback a number of times in that scenario as well. Just kind of switch it up. And I do worry about that a little bit too, because we've seen bullpen days play out before in our Phillies fandom history. 2021 was a very rough time of that. Now, we didn't really have the depth we do now in the bullpen, so it's a little bit different, but I liked Matt Strahm as a Brad Hand replacement, as a lefty who could kind of be a middle reliever. Like let's say a starter goes out fourth inning, he could probably take a few of those innings, or like, we have a lefty situation and Alvarado's unavailable, or we want to save Alvarado for later. Like maybe he's got, now you also have Gregory Soto too, who's another lefty and he's high leverage. So even more reason for Strahm not to need to pitch in those high leverage spots, which I think is great. But I didn't really envision him starting the season as a starter. And yeah, I know he's getting stretched out right now, but I think you're putting him in a very tough spot. And I trust the Phillies, I trust the staff, but I really don't think that's like a favorable position for him, even if he's just going 2 to 3 innings. And even with the bullpen depth we have, I don't think it's a favorable position for the team to start the year that way, unfortunately, using a lot of those bullpen guys. And Nelson did have some moments last year where he cleaned up in 8 innings, especially in like lower leverage situations. But I mean, as a starter, you're being asked to like kind of set the tone for the game and keep your guys in it for a little bit too. And I'm just not sure Nick Nelson, when it matters, can do that. I don't mean that as a slight to him, but when I saw him pitch in bigger spots last year, it didn't seem like he pitched well when the situation was just a little bit elevated. I'm not even talking about super high leverage. So I think that is a concern. And like Troy said, maybe they poach a pitcher off of waivers. I mean, that is a route, like, even though hitter, I think you got to kind of let it play out with long ball Hall right now. As far as pitching goes, I wouldn't be opposed to trying to pick someone up, maybe someone for cheap who could maybe just go 4 to 5 innings and give us like remember when Drew Smiley came in a couple years ago. Now, didn't pitch very well down the stretch of his Phillies career, but like when we first picked him up, he had a couple good outings here and there. Or like Matt Moore. Matt Moore absolutely sucked. So I'm not trying to use him as a good example here. Yeah. But when he pitched well, what did he do? He went like 3 to 5 innings at most. But that was good enough for us in those times where he did it. Again, like I said, he sucked, so he's a bad example because he didn't do that consistently, right? You're asking a guy to do that more than like 1 or 2 times, which is crazy. Matt Moore has 5 no-hit innings, can't go past the 5th inning, and then he has a game where me and Rossi and Ian and a bunch of guys go to, and he was out after the 1st or 2nd inning. So, like Rossi always says, we had some scheduled losses in those years, but
that was my favorite. That was my favorite term, scheduled loss.
Yeah, me and Ian talk about that one a lot.
Who was the other clown that they went into with that year, expecting him to be a starter?
So Chase Anderson also started number 8.
Scheduled loss. Matt Moore, scheduled loss. Anderson, scheduled loss.
Pavetta,
look, to your point, the big difference this time around is they went into that year with those guys expecting them to do that all year. Right now, we're just trying to find somebody who can fill the gaps until we get a little bit healthier. Because once we are healthy, this rotation is elite. This bullpen now is elite, which even last year, mid-season, we thought we wouldn't be saying. So to me, the bigger concern, the bigger loss is Rhys than some of these guys who have minor injuries and who are going to be back sooner rather than later in comparison to Rhys.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm looking at the starting pitching market right now. There's not a ton of guys. If you want to go down the like, I don't even know if this would count as this nostalgia route because I know a lot of people don't like him. Jared Eichhoff's out there if you want to go get him, but unfortunate. I felt like his first 2 years in the rebuild, he was actually like okay, and then injuries happened, bad performance happened, and it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And Vince Worley is coming off of pitching for Great Britain. Maybe he's out there available. But, no, I'm just kidding with both those guys. But there's not really like a ton of guys I'm looking at right now who I'm like, yes, I would probably bring them in. But I think that's kind of the point. That's kind of the reality of the situation right now. But there are a few guys who I'd be like, all right, maybe they could give us a little bit better than just a bullpen day. Like I think Mike Minor's out there, Garrett Richards, Chris Archer, I think, is still out there. Like, there's a few guys out there who I'm like, all right, they might be able to do that, but they could just as easily end up just having a blow-up performance that takes us out of the game initially. So in that scenario, I'd rather have the bullpen day where it's just you're asking a guy to just manage a couple innings. So I think they're probably going to stick with what they got going into the season. Hopefully Ranger isn't out too long. So go for it.
I was just going to say that please no. I don't want any nostalgia. I think I still have PTSD from the Eichhoff, Pavetta, and Velasquez days. Oh my goodness.
That was rough. Scheduled to win with Aaron Nola those years, though.
Yeah, that was some rough baseball, though, for sure.
Yeah, Aaron Ricky Bell after those games was my only excitement during those games. So,
oh my goodness, yeah, he truly one of us. Yeah.
Just need Gibson-like production from somebody filling in. Yeah, and that's a great point. Yeah. I mean, look, Gibson wasn't great last year, but over the course of his Phillies career, when he was like half decent, that's what you're looking for right now. So, if you can get that, you're going to be in a fine situation where you're just hoping someone can pitch just okay enough over 4 to 6 innings to get you to that bullpen and to get you to the next game, honestly, too. So if Derek Hall can play defense, yeah, we know what he can do with the bat, yeah, for sure. And always the honorary Jose Perez, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to the Phillies comment. So I'm a Vladdy fan, fingers crossed, but And yeah, shout out Sean O'Sullivan going back to the rebuild days too, getting plunked in the neck in the Adam's apple by Cameron Rupp when he wasn't looking to get the ball back. So yeah, good times. I mean, that pretty much that play I feel like was pretty much the play of the rebuild. Like that pretty much summed up how things were going at that point. So
yeah, very true.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts here as we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, for anybody who's just joining us or who is watching this replay after we're done, and this is, posted on YouTube. Again, Rhys Hoskins, it was confirmed that he has a torn ACL, and he will. I saw a question earlier in the comments, is he going to miss the entirety of the 2023 season? Yes, they have already confirmed, the organization, that Rhys Hoskins will in fact miss the entirety of the 2023 season. There's a possibility that spring training game was his last game in a Philadelphia Phillies uniform, which is really unfortunate. So other than just reiterating that for anybody watching who might be jumping in now, the unfortunate news is that Rhys Hoskins is done for the year and is a big loss for the Philadelphia Phillies.
Yeah, I think you said it all. I know I'm still excited for the season. I think it's going to be a blast. I will say selfishly, I'm very disappointed Rhys got hurt because I'm coming home after the end of this year, finally for good. Been fun being at college, having a new experience over the past few years, but I'm ready to be back in Philadelphia. I've missed it a lot. This year's maybe missed it a lot. And I was really looking forward to being in the bank for one of those Rhys Hoskins playoff home runs. So it really sucks. But look, let's not lose faith in this team. It's really a tough spot right now. But like Rossi said, it's a sprint. It's a marathon. It's not. Thankfully, it's not a sprint.
Yeah.
And, we have a long season. Also, it's a balanced schedule. We're not playing just the same, NL East opponents every single game, which should make it hopefully a little bit easier. I mean, you're not having to play the Braves and Mets 1,000 times during the year, which, I mean, those are two very formidable opponents who we didn't play well against last year. I think we would have played better. I think we're going to play better against them this year, but it does help. And you're going to get some games against some teams. You're probably just going to have guaranteed series wins. Now, obviously, you have to go out there and play, but from a fan perspective, they're just series you should win, right?
Yeah.
And I think you can manage through those series. And it's kind of like last year. You saw we were just kind of managing, and in that race, we were sometimes in the wild card. Sometimes we were right behind it. But we knew once we got healthier towards the back end of that year, it was just going to be full steam ahead. And granted, it didn't really happen in September. We kind of walked backwards into the playoffs because of the Brewers just messing up and absolutely.
Yeah.
But I do think at the same time, this team has what it takes to just do that again, but also just go full steam ahead and catch fire going into the playoffs. And this season might not start the way we want it to, but all that's going to matter is if it can finish the way we want it to. And that's with the World Series trophy. And let's hope we can do that. And who knows? I know Kyle Schwarber, I forget what injury he had and when he came back. I know he tore something right before the season and everyone thought his season was over. Ended up rehabbing and played in the World Series. So look, I don't know if that's really a feasible possibility for Rhys Hoskins, but hey, never know. So we'll see. But I think there's a lot of reason to still be hopeful for the season. And to me, the Phillies are the team in Philly sports that has the best shot to go all the way right now. So I'm still keeping that faith, and I still think they got a great roster. And think it's kind of underestimated again. Trey Turner was not here last year, and you add him to this lineup, and I think you've seen what he can do already in the World Baseball Classic. Hit a home run today in spring training, upon his return. We got the dude for a number of years. So I'm excited for this team. That's what I got, man.
I would agree with you. The Phillies are in a better position this year than they were last year. I don't even think it's close. Even without Rhys Hoskins, the moves they've made in the bullpen, bringing in Trey Turner, just the addition of T1 Walker to the starting rotation, and now having the prospect of Andrew Painter at some point coming onto the scene this year. I think all those things, counting all those, the Phillies are a better team they were last year, even with Rhys. So here's to dreaming.
Absolutely. And on just real quick on Painter, something I mentioned as we're coming up just was reminded of as we're coming up on the hour. Imagine if Andrew Painter's okay and he pitches this season, and then in the playoffs he pitches in relief in some big moments. Good luck touching that in the ninth inning. Good luck.
Yeah, really.
But that's all I got to say.
And that is it for us. As you said, Hunter, we are coming up on the hour. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, it was a little bit more of a somber stream. In fact, we actually were going to go live at 8 o'clock today. We ended up 10 minutes early. We were going to go live at 8 o'clock and talk about, stock up, stock down, kind of do a fun little thing with the Phillies and some of those guys, like you said, James Harrison and Scott Kingery. And we were going to say, Rhys Hoskins was on the up and up, that his stock was going up going into the season. And then all of a sudden this news broke, unfortunately. And so we had to pivot. So look out for that. We will be doing that soon. Not sure when yet. We'll have to figure that out. But unfortunately, we had to go to this breaking news today. If you are just joining us here at the end, Nate Rossi, Hunter Doyle from Philly Insider. To reiterate, Rhys Hoskins confirmed a torn ACL, is out for the year, unfortunately. But we are still dreaming. We've still got reason to hope in this Phillies team, because we've got an exciting year ahead of us. From all of us at Philly Insider Podcast, thank you for tuning in and have a very good night.